My name is Dave Anderson. I'm a straight incorporated survivor from January 21st, 1978 to February 1981. And I'm here today and I'm talking with Bink. And Bink is a survivor of the Cascade. And I appreciate you being with me, Bink.
Also, heritage too.
In the Heritage, okay.
Yeah.
How old were you when you started going to this? What led up to all of this? What did you think of the place? What did you think of the folks that were there and the staff and all?
Well, what led up to it was behaviors, and I lived in a really cloistered and small community that I wasn't adapting well in, uh, and showing signs of trauma. But I don't think people really understood trauma, you know, with children very well. Uh, so,
Mm-hmm.
a child having traumatic responses could look like just rebellion or behavior, right? So then I was put in a mental hospital where there was sort of a belief that there might be some, well, I wasn't doing well in school, principal's office type stuff. And I was in special ed because I had a learning disability that may not have been aptly dealt with, which is common in 1985. Um, I was kicked out of the special school that I was in, even as a child, that was part of my community, because I was in a religious community. Right. Then I didn't adapt well in the real world, in public school and in special ed. And my behavior was so like intense and rebellious and loud, verbose, talking in class, sent to the prison. Anyway, next thing I know, I'm in a mental hospital finishing 8th grade for 2 months, and I'm too angry, and a lot of it had to do with my appearance, dressing in black, wearing makeup, that sort of thing. So I went to Cascade willingly. I wanted to get away from my mom. But when it started to sink in about even that, about not being able to express my aesthetic, that like broke my heart. Like my identity mattered to me, and I didn't see it as harmful. I didn't see goth or post-punk and black and stuff as part of the story. And it's in so many documents about me. Like it was like 50% of the stuff they were writing about. And I feel like it aligns with time and place stuff. So you have tough love, the satanic panic, that's entering my life. You know what I mean? That my mother's concerned about me doing something nefarious or dark because of makeup and clothes and and then that mixed with and that mixed with not doing well in school and not being able to focus. It was like I couldn't catch, when nowadays they'll help a kid by early intervention, and they don't if they're doing a good job, they don't shame the child about the learning disability, and then they catch it early, and then sometimes the kid has a chance to sort of catch up, right? And I don't know if I have ADHD, but It's like there was a lot of talking, a lot of real kinetic energy that I had as a child, and it was misunderstood as behavior. And then the social policing in the community that I was raised in and everything was so intense that it just built up into this whole entire thing, to the point that I became a pariah in my own small religious community. By the age of 6 and 7, I remember already starting to feel shame about my body, about that I had bad karma, because you and I have talked about this, but bad karma in the sense that I had come from somewhere in a past life, bringing negative things with me as reasons for things, instead of like, are you okay? Child, are you okay?
Right.
And then I think you asked me more about like, what was it like when you got to Cascade? And I didn't answer that. um,
You're doing you're
yeah,
doing
so
well.
thank you. The reason why I gave you some backstory is because I already felt like I had come from a lot of questions asked, like anywhere from what's wrong with you as a rhetorical one to let's talk about this in length about why you're like this. You know what I mean? And you need to remember to be good and da da da. Well, when you get to Cascade, you follow along with no one really, a lot of your questions are about like, did they tell you what the rules were? No, not really. You follow people around and you kind of get a sense of things. Like, I do know that they made it real clear that you weren't allowed to talk about music anymore or tell war stories. They had a whole lexicon of language. Like, I forget what popping off meant, but I think that might have meant, well, I know that you weren't supposed to talk back to your peers and your peers were in charge of you. So if you crossed the line with anyone, like if you kind of just sassed a little bit or something, you would get indicted in a rap. And then raps were 3 hours long, 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And then we also had the ones that were overnight. And at that time they were called celebrations. And I think later on they were called profits. So.
Was the celebration, that sounds like a misnomer somehow.
Oh yeah. Thank you.
What was the celebration? I mean, I know I've learned a little about the profits. This is the first time I've heard it called the celebration, but I can only imagine what was going on during the celebration.
Well, I only made it through 4, but they had names like the Truth, the Children's, the Friends, and Dreams. And they would start in the afternoon, normally around rap time. You would go with your family, which were kids that came around a similar time, kind of within about a 2-month window or so. And that would be your family. And you would go in there and they would just start tearing you down. There were signs on the wall. I remember in the Truth, the first one, there was a sign on the wall that had, a rudimentary drawing of a pendulum. And it said, joy and sorrow. And then they told us that in our lifetime, as much joy as we feel, we will also equally feel as much sorrow. When you're 14 years old, I mean, that may be true, like that, okay, yeah, we feel joy and sorrow in our lives, don't we, But I don't know if I feel like it's like this scale of like equal gravity, if that makes sense. Because, I mean, joy is such a beautiful thing, right? Why would I have to pay penance in the form of sorrow? Anyway, and so that was a sign on the wall that I remember, and it was in a module, and so that's the thing too, like, when you're talking about first impressions, like traumatic places and experiences, sight, smells, touch, the fake wood walls, the modules, the way they're built are like trailers, and then, green carpet that seems old, like it's been refabbed for the purpose to use it on campus because they haven't built another structure yet to have it in, the right kind of space. So you're in this dark trailer like thing, and it feels really exploitative, if that makes sense. And that's subjective though, because it felt really scary to go into a room and then not know what's going to happen to me, because they don't tell you anything, I also remember people going back and them playing music and people dancing around and being like, I just got out of my blah, blah, blah celebration. Oh my gosh. I just want to share with everyone in the lodge. The lodge was nice about everything that happened. It was so fantastic. And let's dance to this like Neil Diamond song, or let's dance to this song that was played in that celebration. And then that will get the kids ramped up for it that haven't been in that one yet. Or the older ones can see how great we're doing because we're showing them the joy and happiness of the building back up of the latter portion of a 24-hour cycle, psychological brainwashing session.
Well, let me ask you this, Bink. In you said your family. Now, your family or your peer group that you came in with, y'all all went into this at the same time. What was the age differences, or were you all pretty much the same age?
I think there may have been some kids that were, like 16, but I don't remember that as clearly because the gravity of being 14 and then being forced to talk about sexual things was really painful. So I remember other 14-year-olds, I remember those boys being asked questions about sex and stuff, which leads into people who are talking about fabricated memory. Like, I have an example of it. So you know how like sometimes memories are memories of memories, and I've been able to remember, not some things will come back to me, but I'm not one of those kind of people that tends to block out. I'll kind of have a memory and then carry it with. So I remember them. Can I talk about something kind of hard to talk about and kind of intimate? Is that okay?
It's up to you.
Okay. So I'm not naming names. Yeah.
Okay.
But I felt bad for the boys, that there was a couple of them that this happened in the truth celebration, where they were like, did you have sex? And they were like, just crumpled in on themselves, looking down and kind of being like, yes, sort of answers. And them being like, and this is the clinker, is that the word? This is the real thing here. Being like, well, how long did you last before you came? And them being like, I don't know. I don't know, maybe a couple of minutes. And, it's a 14-year-old kid. Don't lie. Don't lie. You know that it was only like 30 seconds. Like this contest from these adult men, one in his, like, I think 50s or 60s, and another one in his mid 30s, saying this to these boys, right? Yeah.
Oh, okay. They were older.
I'm sorry.
These people that were asking, that was the staff, and they were considerably older.
Yeah.
So
there's a room of like 15 kids with these two men saying these things to boys, right? And then I remember just having my face in my hands and talking about, I came out as bisexual in this setting. That is not the way I think most people would prefer to come out about our sexuality.
I would agree. Yeah. I would agree. You mentioned that this lodge was on campus, right? Yeah. How big was the campus?
I don't remember like the magnitude of the deal, but I remember like the lodge was the biggest building, and then there was a pond, and then there was a pathway along that, wilderness everywhere. We were really, really remote in Whitmore, California. The town itself was
in California,
miles down a gravel road, a very long gravel road drive to the town of Whitmore, which had a notable amount of staff living in the town of Whitmore, which was, I think, at that time in 1986, population 44. But if a kid ran away, they'd have to go through all of that wilderness just to get to Whitmore. And then the town's got staff. And then how do you get to Redding? So for people that ran, that includes Paris Hilton actually ran from there. And so did a couple of my peers, somebody I don't know from there, but know now. And then somebody that I really loved ran while we were there together, and she was in my family. I did not. run.
In other words, you stayed and took it?
Yeah, until I couldn't take it anymore. Then I got myself kicked out.
When we were talking about, the impressions of the staff, your peers, um, and you gave me the impression that they didn't give you a clear idea of what to do and what the rules were and whatnot.
Not really.
Do you have any
I mean, like,
idea what the end goal of the place was, what they wanted to do for you?
well, a lot of that. So in the daily life, there was a lot of that pantomiming, ask a question. And then if it was inappropriate, that student, because the students were running a lot of it, would say, oh, that's inappropriate. And then, they give you kind of a little bit of a pass at the beginning. So I guess there was that sort of adapt kind of on the daily thing. But then
Mm-hmm.
how, like a rap, that's when you start to see the meat of the whole thing, tearing it down to the bone, because it's just the amount of yelling, and then it was a courtesy to switch seats with someone across the room, circle of chairs, switch seats with someone, so then you're not spitting in their face, or you might not punch them because you're so angry at them, and you can rail them. But you know what that
Mm-hmm.
does? That sets a tone in the room. You're sitting on the edge of your seat and you're going, la, 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 fuck you, you bitch. Because that was literally what I was called often, because
Mm-hmm.
I had an anger problem, right? Okay, so that makes me a bitch. Um, God, gender policing stuff. Anyway, um, the shock of that, and so that's where all of the oh, I see that we have a
No, it's good. You're
that's kind
okay.
of, yeah, my screen went dead. So that's when I started to go, oh shit, you know what I mean? And like anxiety, uh, adrenaline rushes, and going just like, what is this? And the drudgery and fear combined. I know some people think drudgery is more connected to being bored. No, it can be about fear, and 3 hours, 3 times a week, people write your name on a little piece of paper, and you'd sometimes have a third of the people in that room who wanted to scream at you, and I'm a sass back kind of person. So I got in a
Mm-hmm.
lot of trouble, and I was definitely a pariah there. And some people, I think, would
Mm-hmm.
like to use that as a reason for, like, well, you didn't adapt, and that's why you had a hard time. And I've had people be conciliatory with me that are alumni, like, yeah, you had it hard because you couldn't adapt. I was fine.
I think, in my experience, I was 14 when I went into my program as well. And as you know, women and females tend to mature quicker than men do. I mean, my little 14-year-old mind was just stunned, and as a result, I tried to hide as much as I could in a group of 350 people. And inevitably, I was noticed. And when we're talking about your raps and the rah, 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 and fuck you, um, and you called it drudgery, and I was using the word dread, because it's like
Both, both. Yeah, I gotta
yeah,
agree with you about both.
yeah.
Drudgery, I mean, I probably don't know the true definition of that word, but do you know what I mean about the length of time, like knowing that that's something you had to do every week, along with the work crews, along with if you had dishes, along with the expectations of daily life, even the way that we'd have to clean the dorms in the morning. Like I remember picking lint off the floor and being told it wasn't good enough, that my military folds on my bed weren't good enough. And then, and then this is students that are, that are policing me, sometimes they're my age even. And uh, trying to kind of be manipulative and see if I can kind of get away with a little bit, because they're my peers, right? They're gonna understand that I'm frustrated about not folding the t-shirts, right? Like fuck the fucking but No, no, everyone was seemed so all in, which is so funny because later on in another celebration, I found out that my entire family all had been engaging in all kinds of stuff, and that's what we spent the entire night talking about was how they had been breaking the rules. And I hadn't, and I hadn't totally bought in either, but I was like crying about why was I left out of all the rule breaking and fun? And then also at the same time being like, how come I am good and I never got any credit, and then being told to shut the fuck up. It seems
Yeah,
so petty in a way, but when you're 14 and 15, no, that stuff hurts, hurts. And I wasn't a quiet person like yourself, which made me feel sad for you in a way. I have a ability to kind of picture things and have empathy in a, or compassion or sympathy in a way.
of course.
Which is why I brought up
Of
the
course.
boys to begin with. But and I'm also not really on the gender binary. I'm non-binary, and I had stuffed it throughout those years or whatever. But as a really little kid, that fits a lot into my trauma. That when I was 6 and 7, I was trying to be hanging out with boys, and it almost would just be like so weird to be like pushed down and told not to manifest like those things that I actually just knew about myself, and then have it treated like, oh, absolutely not, and then get in more trouble for boys for for masculine like behavior, not just
Mhm.
doing bad stuff, but just being loud, bawdy, communicative, talkative, kinetic, moving around
Mhm.
during circle time and things like that. And so the gender policing in the environment at Cascade also felt really hard. I came out as bi in the true celebration, and then I never was able to talk about it ever again. Uh, I can only imagine how other queer kids, LGBTQ plus kids, felt while they were there. I know some of them adapted. I know people, I can see that they're friends with staff on Facebook. Blows my
Mhm.
mind. But um, I think it was hard for some of them. I know years later too, it must have been harder to be sent there for just that too. To be
Right.
some kids being
Did
sent to
Cascade?
places for just being under the umbrella, under the queer umbrella. Like, whoa, not having ever
Well,
broken a law.
you had mentioned that they didn't like the way you dressed. They didn't like your appearance.
At
They
home.
didn't like that you were an outspoken individual.
Yeah.
They didn't like um, this person because they were gay. They didn't like this person because they just didn't fit in what sounds like the norms. Um, and you strike me as a real or not emotional, and I don't
That's
want to say sensitive and adapt, but you're an empathic person. You're a very empathic person.
thank you.
And I suspect at 14, 15, you were also a very sensitive person too. And what I'm wondering is to see all of this brutality, towards another human being, what does that do to an empathic soul?
It hurts
Yeah,
a lot.
I'm sorry it does.
And then I feel shame about being mad at the other kids for adapting. You know, I would get jealous of them. But I also saw things like preferential treatment. And I also think that class, fits into all of this. The Cascade was a fancy school that was trying to be the college preparatory version of the Synanon cult based schools. And we dressed up at night
Hmm.
for dinner and for smushing after dinner. And smushing is like, now I understand the gravity of smushing.
Yeah, the whole smushing thing is that's bewildering to me. In my program, we weren't even allowed to look at a woman,
Yeah.
much less smush.
I read
And
that.
then
No
from,
touching. Yeah, I read the no touching on some of the lists. Yeah.
yeah, it is 180 different degree kind of thing. So
Yeah.
imagine the shock when I heard it. And then I heard, and I wonder if you can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding was is you were encouraged to smooch with the opposite sex, right?
Only staff, but you were encouraged to smush with the same sex as
But you
students.
could smooch with staff.
Yeah. Says a lot,
Okay.
doesn't
And
it?
if, if a 14, 15, 16-year old um, developed a rapport with this person and God forbid have a biological reaction to smooching, what were there any consequences for that, or was that kind of understood?
I don't know. I mean, people can hide hard-ons.
Well, that's true. That's true. The reason I ask is because I heard from a CDU person, survivor, that, oh, I'm sorry, from a Mount Bachelor survivor, that when they got, into the smooshing and they had any kind of biological reaction, male or female, any kind of emotion, they got ripped apart. But it was still encouraged. So there's a dichotomy there, don't you think?
Wow. Yes. I don't remember hearing anything about that while I was there. I'm not
Okay.
saying that that didn't happen.
Right. Well, I was just curious. I was
No,
just
that's a good
curious.
question though, and that's I'm sorry for that survivor.
Yeah. And I'm sorry I threw you a left field question on
No,
that.
it's good. I cry real easy, and I can picture things happening to people
Yeah. Yeah.
abstractly, of
Well,
course.
that's what an empath does. I appreciate it. I'm accused of being an empath too. uh,
I just liked the
so
point you made. It was kind of sweet.
on this big campus, and you kind of indicated there were like 20 people in your peer group, your family, I think you said.
15 to 20. I don't remember. You know what I mean? I don't.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It might have even been less than 15.
Do you
But
have any sense of memory of how many people in total were on campus? How many families were on campus?
the number 200 stands out, but I don't know what. Probably
Okay.
200 plus. It, and that leads me to just briefly, if I can try to
Yeah.
be a little less verbose, the fact that the students were running everything. Like they were, I to this day, people swear that they were not indoctrinated, that they were benefiting, right? And I'm like, yeah, but the amount of humiliation that goes into that. Also, a for-profit school doing that. I'm not saying that they were embezzling money, but like that just gives me the absolute creeps that we would have, you know, what seemed like 12 staff. I know there was more than that because there was teachers and stuff like that. But at night when the smushing happened, there wasn't a lot of staff present. There wasn't, you know what I mean?
Mm.
It was a student running dishes. It was a student uh, who would tell me how to get ready in the morning, and look at my t-shirts and make sure they were folded correctly. They would make executive decisions, if you want to call it that.
Right. It reminds me of the Lord of the Flies, what you're describing.
But in a more organized way, because adults and the formulaic way that it came from Synanon,
Right.
and I understand the gravity of Synanon being more violent. I'd like to go into that at some point too in the conversation about
Feel
trauma
free.
is
Feel
trauma.
free.
Yeah, and that hitting, even just last night reading something about, well, if there's no hitting, that's better. And me just being like, I've experienced both. And the terror of being chased through a house or being jostled and thrown around and then having to collect yourself and not being able to even breathe for like an hour afterwards, and somebody being like, let's play checkers so that you can feel better. And being like, that kind of crying, like you were shaken, and then you're shaking for an hour, right? And
Yeah.
seeing kids, my friends that I loved, rubbing a blanket and sucking their fingers and being like this, and not being able to breathe. Uh, uh, Help me get back to where I was. Sorry, I think I just started dissociating a little bit.
That's okay.
Yeah, that psychological, like, okay, and this is an interesting thing with CPTSD. Another term for it is developmental trauma. So when you're a child,
Yes.
and your brain is trying to make certain kinds of milestones, and you have somebody interrogating you, you have somebody sit you down and they lecture you about how you need to develop a higher sense of compassion when you already have one, and then, but that it has to have a certain kind of nuance and the specialness to it. I'm talking more about my earlier childhood here. But then going to this place, and then they're all about it too, except for they don't put it under the umbrella of karma, but under more about what's your life lesson going to be. So getting back to maybe answering your question a little bit more adroitly, this college preparatory thing, you're like a little adult, and now you're going to go forward into the world and bring your little adult, highly developed, nuanced wisdom out into it. Like, what's the good news, fellow religious person? Well, Kahil Gibran's The Prophet is this wonderful book that was read to us in each one of these celebrations. Like, it'd be easy for me to call it propaganda, but I think it goes deeper than that. I think it goes into...
What would you call it?
Well, because each one of the celebrations was related in relation to an excerpt out of Kahil Gibran's The Prophet. So the truth, the children, so like the beginning of the post about children says, and then a woman with a babe in her breast says, this is paraphrasing, says, speak to us of children. And then the teacher says, la, 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 right? And, and I'm gonna lay it out here a little bit better too, time and place, right? So the impact of like post 1960s cult, like, a religiosity in the social construct of the world that you and I grew up in was a lot more prevalent at that time, I believe. But I'm not saying that the children from the 90s and into the 2000s may not have experienced that. I'm certain that kids that experienced religious abuse ended up in TTI.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
But I also think that it was so highly normalized, and a shame attached to it. Parents trying so hard to, maybe when they had been hippies or whatever, be good and good citizens and responsible to the world and their lives. Like, I understand the motivation. I totally understand the motivation. And I understand why that was what entered into my life and taught to me. And I in a weird abstract sort of way, I respect it. But the nature by which I experienced it was devastating for me. And then when I took that into Cascade, the amount of it being so parallel to that, like, you'd think that I would have adapted really well, right? But no, it felt like nails in a coffin for me, for my identity, for my personhood. It just, it really did me in. My therapists have said that it's the crux of my trauma, and it's definitely was like nightmares. So nightmares will be like things like seeing how people emulated behaviors mimicked in the childhood world that I had, and performative stuff, because there was a lot of plays and things. Like, I was in a play as a kid that was a lot of work, and people trying to reenact specialness and elegance, like an aesthetic of elegance around the community of people I grew up with. And then that going into Cascade, the little adult, the charming, dress nice for dinner and then cuddle with your friends, it didn't always have to be stuff. And just so many things. And also the hard truth stuff. You know, like when you get yelled at in a rap, well, you know, I had teachers for that in the school that I was raised in. You know, they had their own Montessori school that I was kicked out of too. And I would get lectured by adults in my life who would tell me that hard truth, wagging their finger in my face, standing over me, picking me up, swinging me around, picking me up, throwing me onto a couch, right? Yeah, that's physical, but there was like it came with all of this shame because I wasn't adapting into the cultural world that I was raised in, right? Well, just picture all of that as the same in some ways at Cascade, except for that it was a lot more brutal, mean, it didn't have to do with karma, but it had to do with like how you were going to end up because there was all that gaslighting. Like if you don't do this, you're going to end up a prostitute. You're going to end up on the street. You know, I have to put quotes around this because I don't want to disparage sex workers when I say this. You know, because I feel like a lot of people
Right.
do illegal things. It's under the duress of their own trauma. So criminality and stuff like that, I'm not down with blaming people for their own problems. You know, they need help. And I hope
Hmm.
that the future of helping people in schools or in just in therapy in general is that they stop blaming patients for their behaviors because, you know, and like there's some good things about CBT, but hey, you know, what about trauma informed therapy in this world? You know, that goes all the way into the concepts of racism and people that are really marginalized, you know. That's my hubs.
Hmm.
My best friend. But
Yeah,
yeah,
the
he's really
marginalized,
welcoming around.
disenfranchised. Um,
Yeah.
I was certainly a part of that too, because I was raised as I'm a creative, and I was raised by a family of accountants that were strictly numbers, black and white. And what the hell are they going to do with a child that's coloring on the walls and and singing and tap dancing and all of that stuff? What the hell are they going to do with this kid?
God, I related to your entire list.
Did your folks have any idea what was going on at Cascade?
Um, I feel like, okay, so yeah, I want to get into that a little bit because I had a sort of semi-prepared answer about this because performative as a concept is a big part of my life. Like because of the small community that I was in, I would vacillate between being able to be performative for what was expected of me, including plays, but even in the everyday life, right? And even in my
Right.
home life, though, I found there to be pressure about performance and performative, you know, and everybody has what's called the uh, the presentation of self in everyday life. We all talk in a tone, or I talk with my hands, for example. You know, we all do that stuff, right? Like, or making eye contact can sometimes be important.
Right.
And I wouldn't think we should pressure some children to do those sorts of things, though, if they're like autistic, for example. But like, uh, what was the question again? Because that leads up to the answer.
Did your parents know? Did your parents understand what was taking place?
Yeah. So what I did was basically a really great performance of everything is fine. You know, I don't think that I tried to tell them that anything was wrong at Cascade because I thought that everybody didn't, I mean, it felt like most everyone didn't like me and that I wasn't doing well, but I would try to put it on a good show that everything was fine, you know? And I do think that I was trying to adapt to what they wanted of me, but I just was different, you know? I think that I needed help in a different kind of way because I had already come there with
Right.
so much pain. I was in a lot of
Yeah.
pain. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, they did not know. And then it kind of came up real sudden, like when I got kicked out and refused to do dishes one day and was put on bands with everyone for 2 weeks and waited in the kitchen. And this man would come and talk to me and take notes on what I did and report that back. And I've seen the document. Like, you know, it's
Hmm.
weird form of surveillance. I guess it helped protect the school maybe, or kind of gave them an idea of like why I needed to leave. And I was glad that I went to Heritage instead of Provo Canyon. And everything was so great that I really adapted really well in that environment. But looking back, there was a lot of things wrong about that place too. But
Really?
I see it more in the form of trauma in peers that I developed close relationships whom I loved. And that's something else. Yeah. So, and there too, same thing, everything's fine. Well, when I got back home, I was in college for a very short period of time, and then I ran away at 18. So that says a lot.
What?
That says a lot, I think.
Yeah. When you went to college and then you ran away from there at 18, was that what were you running from?
My family dynamic was just still not the best. I think that the community that I grew up in isn't right for everyone. And when you're born into something, you don't have a choice. I mean, you're told you
Right.
do, but you don't. And I think that I didn't know how to be in the world. I mean, I was in their small school, then remember the timeline here. A small school, then a couple of years in public school, a few years in public school, not knowing how to be in the world then Cascade, then Heritage for another 2. And I graduated a year early because you go to school in the summer. And here I am in college at 17. And, I was almost like on autopilot. I was really doing really weird stuff at this point that I don't want to get into too much, I think, because it would probably be a little too much. It would be easy for me to get into self-blaming about,
Okay.
feeling that, well, here, I'll give an example. I thought that it was really feminist to just have sex with a lot of people. So I would just kind of give myself over to things, but it didn't feel right, but it also seemed like it was what I was supposed to do. And also I just wanted to go out and follow, I didn't really like the Grateful Dead exactly, but I followed them around because it was a place to go. I mean, everyone was leaving Telegraph Avenue one day and things were starting to get cold and I didn't want to be left behind. So I followed those kids or whatever. And that was a little bit like a cult in some ways too. So I had to adapt to that environment. But yeah, of course I wanted to try to get kind of weird because that's how my parents found God. I mean, in a way I was mimicking what I thought was the adaptations and then the wonderful things that came their way, even though it was through this process and they tried to warn me not to, get into mind altering things and get too out there into the world. The world was a dangerous place. But I felt like, well, that's how they figured it out. That's maybe what I need to do. I'll find God too. I know it doesn't make sense. I didn't mean to hurt them. I didn't mean to hurt my parents by that choice. I really, really honestly didn't think that. At least at first I didn't. I didn't think that it would hurt them. I really, really honestly didn't think that. I didn't think that it would hurt them. It was about freedom and finding answers, and I guess I kind of felt like I was failing them and themselves and everything. So I just took off. But I know it hurt.
Yeah, I was considered the disappointment too. When I came out of my program, my head was so filled with such nonsense that I was endowed with the seeds of greatness. I could change the world. I could accomplish anything. I couldn't change a tire, when I got out. Scared to death in high school. So I excelled there so I could get out of there in a year. And immediately found myself, in college. And I couldn't pass basic English. I couldn't diagram a sentence. I couldn't do any of that. And so I understand. And I didn't realize how, go ahead.
Oh, because I wanted to talk about the topic of specialness because that's something that was really pervasive at Cascade and also what I grew up with. Specialness about and magical thinking about the destiny of a person, right? And so when I went to college, and it was a beautiful art college, and I started to see how I wasn't special anymore. I wasn't that different kid that did art. I was around people who had been able to develop a little bit better prior to their arrival there. I was terrified of failure. So I think I ran just out of the sheer fear that, oh, maybe I'm not creative or an artist, or I won't, adapt to this. And I didn't understand anything. I mean, Allen Ginsberg came and spoke at my school, and I didn't understand the gravity of what an important person he was. I just, I was still a child. Yeah. So in terms of not being able to change a tire, and yeah, there was fundamental areas where I remember my dear friend was like helping me type my college papers. I mean, we didn't see it as cheating because it was like, I just didn't know how to type. So, it was my words, and, she was helping me just try to give me a leg up so I could get through. I think I ran from failure, from the fear of failure. Yeah. Thanks for saying what you did, because I think it helped me give an answer. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see how, if your self-esteem and your perception of yourself is all but just destroyed, go out and do what you do and do it well. And you can't function in a social setting because you weren't taught. You can't really excel in your studies because you've been muted, in some facility like you were. And then finding yourself around people who do what you do, and they love to do it just like you do. But again, you were stunted in your creative process, and I don't know about you, but I mean, I kind of compare myself to other artists, and it's like instead of just admiring them,
Yeah.
I criticize me. Where it's just as easy to admire what they do and enjoy what they do, but I got to turn it on me.
Yeah, I get that. I will feel really good about something like a project that I did and feel really encouraged and hear, oh yeah, she should work with an author for a children's book, or or they are really coming along with that project, and you can see they could do more great things with that, or oh, this is a really good piece even. And I don't know, social media, right? It's like, maybe if 10 people like it and I saw that 45 people saw it, it breaks my heart.
Yeah, that is kind of brutal.
Like, I hate that I'm weak like that,
I think we perceive it, Bink, as a weakness, but it goes back to that perception thing. I find myself having to really question authority, the authority that's right here, because I can't believe half of the shit I tell myself. I just can't, because it ain't true. I'm not a failure. I'm not this. I'm not that. Just because 15 people saw it, maybe they didn't like it, and that's okay. Because see, I didn't have that opportunity, and I'm wondering if you feel the same way. Did you learn how to accept criticism? Did you learn how to accept a compliment? Did you learn how to flirt? Did you learn how to catch any kind of social cues? Because for me, I mean, that was just all but destroyed. you know, and it took me years and years before, you know, I could look a woman in the eye, and I don't mean looking at her body. I mean, I would look right here, you know, so they couldn't tell I wasn't looking them in the eye, but I couldn't look
Yeah.
at the body. You know, it was just so
Oh
many
yeah.
things warted and stunted. And it sounds so familiar what you're saying.
I have had analysts talk about it too, that you can sort of be running amok, and a teenager and all this stuff happens, right? And then around the between the ages of 18 and 25, if you have a lot of layers of trauma and anxiety, it will kind of hit you in a similar way to how schizophrenia does on an organic level, but it can happen on a something having to do, I think, with brain chemistry. And so, you know, I'm telling therapists I was doing this, and this wrong when I was 25, and the therapist being like, well, you have really intense anxiety, you know, and give yourself a break, you know. Uh, and I see now that, yeah, I didn't, you know, I have learned how to do some things like forgive myself for how I ran around, also not making eye contact with people. And the way that I tried to socialize all through my 20s was just a train wreck as a situation, and I could not look people in the eye either, you know. And I would walk down the street, and it was so pervasive, the fear was so intense that I thought that people were in cars staring at me, and there was no one in them. I believed all kinds of really bizarre, kind of woo-woo, new age stuff, you know. And so I'd internalized it all, and I was using it all against myself. That I had ruined my spiritual body, you know, by running away and doing crazy stuff. And I hurt my brain, and I don't know how I would ever, you know, have a life. And so I did a bunch of crazy stuff, and I spent time around people. I made good friendships too, but I spent time around people that I wouldn't now. I know that I've gotten much more psychologically healthy now because I have some boundaries now. And I remember now the things that guys were doing around me and stuff, you know, like in social settings. Like I wouldn't put up with that crap now, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I remember getting punched in the face for standing up for myself, but I'd do it again today,
Mm-hmm.
you know. But I think I would understand that after the punch hit me in the face, that I don't feel you know, as much shame about it. I know that sounds like an intense thing to say, but you know, there it is. Like, no, I don't think I've ever been able to stop standing up for other people and myself this whole time. You know, I know that I also wasn't always the kindest to people either, and I made a lot of mistakes in my, you know, young adulthood. But I mean, and I'm pretty lucky though, because a lot of people have forgiven me and they understand that it was, they don't necessarily frame it under trauma, but I think they understood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think in large, people want to believe and want to understand and want to accept us, um, but our stories are just understandably they're bizarre, you know, and it's
Very.
hard to wrap their heads around. And you know, that's part of the purpose of doing this little project, so it can be said in 100 different ways in 100 different languages if necessary.
Don't you think it's interesting too that it is an other than experience, right? It's so different. And then when you were in it, if you were different, that's even worse.
Yeah, it was
Gravity
it
of
was
that.
horrible. It was horrible.
Yeah.
um, because then you're stuck with that being abnormal. You know, for instance, that poor kid that you were talking about, that boy that was being emasculated by another male. Um, how long is that going to stick between a fellow's ears? You know, um, how long, are those repercussions going to ring? Um, and who the hell would say that to a child? I mean, anyway,
The truth was probably the worst one.
yeah.
It was the first one.
Mm,
It was like a nightmare in real life.
yeah,
Yeah.
I understand. I understand. So many questions. And my mind's just spinning.
Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Yeah.
But, admittedly, I'm befuddled. I mean, the more people I talk to, the more answers I get. I come up with 1,000 different more questions, and I try to limit it to 12.
Yeah.
Um, it's different every time.
How about chronic health outcomes? I noticed on your sign that that's what you had. Me too. Like, so, I mean, I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome,
What's
and
that?
I know it's a connective tissue disorder that affects your collagen, which comprises a lot of your body, kind of like water. It's like, it's in all your joints, and, you can do weird, I'm not supposed to, we're technically not supposed to do this stuff, but, and that creates a bunch of pain, right? Well, I don't think that I symptomatically would have suffered as much had I not had so much trauma. So like the fibromyalgia, I'm sure wouldn't, I feel sure, wouldn't have been as debilitating as it is had I not had as much trauma and then gone out and done more traumatic things that created more trauma. Um, because we do perpetuate it on accident. Um,
Much of
and
much
I
of
don't
my
think I
health
could,
issues.
well, I couldn't keep up with the kids. That's the other thing. I couldn't keep up in Trek. When we went and did our Outward Bound trek, I didn't have hiking
Right.
boots. I was doing it in soft Reeboks, and my ankles were, rolling in the entire time. And we're doing like 9 miles. We get back, and this like big. I remember you reminded me of Arnold Schwarzenegger for some reason. He was just a kid though. Like, being like, you got nothing out of it. And then I had remembered thinking, gosh, that's not okay, guy. Like, I thought you had been helping me throughout the trek. I thought that you thought I did get something out of it because I was so grateful to you. And now we get back and you're tearing into me for failing trek because I complained a lot. Well, lo and behold, later on in life, I found out that, when your ankles fold in and you have a sway back and loose joints or whatever, it's really hard to keep up with other people, even for things like dishes. Like, I couldn't be as fast as other people, and I would get heat for that. um but do you feel like, if you don't mind me asking you a question, do you feel like your chronic illnesses were more intense or more life impacting because of trauma? I mean, have you looked at the ACEs scores at all? Because yeah,
Yes, I have.
yeah.
And to answer your question, absolutely. The ACEs scores, I didn't do real well. I've had a heart attack. I've had open heart surgery. I've suffered a stroke. Um, and I don't have a pretty mouth. And the reason I don't have a pretty mouth is because of malnourishment when I was locked up. We were fed peanut butter sandwiches that were frozen, thawed out, delivered to us half thawed with a 3 ounce Dixie cup of milk with ice in it. And that was it for 12, 14 hours. Now, as a developing child, this malnourishment, systemic, ongoing, consistent malnourishment at such a young age, as the body grows older, we're designed to crumble anyway. But I mean, it really didn't help that I was malnourished as a child.
My response with that, instead of, because it's easy for me to sometimes like cry when I think about other people, but I actually feel like visceral rage when I hear that. happened to you and other kids? Like, just, I'm so sorry that happened to you.
I appreciate that, and it's not your fault. It's not your fault. But I do appreciate your understanding. Most definitely, I appreciate your understanding.
I don't feel like it's my fault. It just makes me get that hypervigilance, like I want to go in and save people. And I don't have a savior complex like I'm special. More
No,
like I just want to like frickin', break into one of those places right now, Like,
yeah,
and I bet a lot of people when you went to Provo, I'm sure I could kind of get a sense of like love when I watched the live feed because I couldn't be there, uh,
yeah.
and a lot of healing and stuff. But I got this impression that there was uh, people had to kind of maybe set aside their anger. But I'm sure that people felt angry for other people when they would hear things for them,
It was there. It was a very interesting dynamic because the organizers they pleaded for us to be calm. They pleaded for us to be respectful. They pleaded for nobody to act out and be violent. And where I was at, I was standing at the top of the hill short by, and I looked over the crowd. I did not see the violence. I did not see that anger. Now, as a survivor of Straight Incorporated in the past, when we would um, protest, that anger, that hostility, that rage, that yelling, screaming, that came out in protest. And what I'm thinking now that my mind's starting to come back a little bit together is that we were the only ones representing. We were just straightlets. We didn't have people from this place. We didn't have people from that place. We didn't have people from the other place, and 16 other different places representing and backing us up. What I saw happening there is everybody knows that everybody's from everywhere else, and kind of tempered that desire to lash out. And it was like, no, let's keep that singleness of purpose. Let's do what we're here to do. Yeah, we're angry. Of course, we're mad. Duh. But when we got to that point, when it was time to walk, it was incredibly quiet.
I
Incredibly
saw,
quiet. I mean,
yeah,
for people there, it was just a solemn walk. It was almost like a funeral procession, if you will, because it was that reverent. We knew what we were walking into, um, and I think back at the protests that we were so violent and so angry. I just wished that our past events had as not just the sheer numbers of people. No, 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 no. The amalgamation of all of these programs together as one, man, it calmed us down. Man, it just made us feel some semblance of peace. So when we walked to Provo Canyon, yeah, we flipped them the bird, of course, but we didn't throw rocks. We didn't yell obscenities. We walked through a beautiful neighborhood, and the neighborhood overwhelmingly gave us support.
I saw, yeah,
It's because we weren't disrespectful.
yeah, okay, yeah.
And it was an amazing thing.
I just meant more like not like action, angry as a form of action,
Mhm.
but more like how sometimes you can feel angry for another person because you feel like it was just so unjust
Oh,
that you want
absolutely.
to protect them or
I
hold them.
Yeah, I can be angry and I can be real pissed off, but I don't have to act belligerent, to get my
Yeah,
point across.
yeah, yeah, that makes
And I
sense.
think that's what I was getting at, and I was real proud of us. I was real proud of us
Yeah,
because really, I think we did good. Not that we behaved well. I mean, we did, but we did a good thing. We did a
yeah,
good service. We did something good for mankind. And that's very humbling. And I think that humbling kept us at bay. You know, it kept that anger and rage from raising its ugly head, you know. Um,
I wonder what the future will bring though when we try to shut down and legislation and more action and things like that. Not that I really want to frame it around anger, but I'm just curious
yeah,
to see how this is all going to pan out.
I don't know. I don't know. I can tell
Kind
you
of
that
excited.
I'm anxious to see what unfurls, what unfolds, what's next. Um,
Mm.
um, because I think we made a major impact. Um, and so, yeah, continuing efforts, I know are coming, but I'm just interested to see what unfolds. I don't know where it's going, but I'm really excited to go. um,
I'm excited too.
I want to get on
Um,
the bus and go.
how
um,
was it that you were invited? Like, do you have to go onto the like Breaking Code Silence website and have participated to have been invited? Because I didn't really know about it. And then I was
yeah,
wondering if it's going to happen again next year or
I know things are in the works. I don't pretend to know what they are.
okay.
Uh, I wasn't invited. I just invited myself. I tried everything I could do to get there.
Yeah. Yeah. I
It,
would have tried to do if I'd known, I would have tried to make it. But
I robbed
yeah.
Peter to pay Paul without pissing off Peter. Everything I could think of to get there, and I got there. And it was,
Yeah. Good for
um,
you. I'm so
I
glad that
found,
you were there for you. And for other
thank,
people I saw there that I admire, like Crystal. And
yeah,
yeah, I really appreciate her um, nuanced way of looking at things. And she's able to really really get into the meat of it. You know, it takes me a long time to finish my points, but I really like how succinct she is.
she is a
So
an
smart.
old soul with a deep heart, and
Yeah.
I've come to care very much for her. I really have. Um,
I
before
admire.
we kind of
Yes.
before we kind of wrap this up, and I admit it's kind of personal and maybe selfish, but I'm curious as to why you wanted to do this and have a talk with me today.
Well, I don't even know if I did a very good job of representing myself very well here today, but the gravity of developmental, psychological, and emotional trauma is I don't want to live alone with that for the rest of my life.
Right.
I've had to be in therapy on and off since I was 28. Um, I've achieved a lot, even when I would have to back out of things to give the gravity to the mental health needs that I had, like work stress and things like that. And but I've accomplished quite a bit for somebody who um, is living with all of this. I'm still living with it to this day. Um, and so I want to heal. It's definitely self-oriented on a lot of levels. On the other hand, uh, because I still have the narrative, like, oh, you failed, that's still in there. Um,
Mhm.
but then there's the other voices, my own. It's not totally polarized. It's just that you can have intrusive thoughts, as you know. And then I have ways of being able to say, and then also just knowing people like you and everything. It's opening doors and closing doors, you know? And uh I don't know. It's like feels good to even just know like you're a little kid. It's not all my fault. It's not all my fault, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and then of course there's the wanting to help other people part. That's a big thing in my life that has existed for a very long time. And I want to help other people. And I want other people out there to know that they're not alone. Everything that you read here is backwards, but this says you're not alone, and my sign's back there backwards. But yeah, I'm doing this for other people too, as well.
Well, for what it's worth, I can read that perfectly. It's fine
Oh,
looking
okay.
this
It's
way.
not backwards.
No,
It's backwards on my
it's the
end.
perception.
Okay.
It's
Yeah.
the perception. The if I'm just going to ask you one more question. I feel like I'm just one more question.
No, I have no problem
If
answering anything.
if a parent or you have a friend that's a parent and they're thinking, because Johnny's in school and he's fucking up, he's smoking pot and he skipped a couple of days of school last semester, and we're looking to put Johnny in some help. What would you say to that person?
Don't do it. I mean, don't do it. Don't do it. I mean, we're all talking about this on a larger scale of shutting down. So there's this abolish aspect, this abolitionist aspect of it. But there's also I've said it in some of my videos, like reform schools, like over here.
Mhm.
And yeah, because children are going to need interventional help. But where's the compassion? Where is the trauma informed, way of moving forward through this? Because it was all about blaming the child when we were young. And is that still what's happening in these families? I mean, who the fuck is Dr. Phil to have, he's sending kids to the, you know what I mean? And then he did a spot on the problem with them. And I'm like, well, I don't know how much he's trying to, protect his own narrative there. But like, I don't like that guy. He's Gestalt-like, he's confrontational, he's letting people air stuff out in these embarrassing ways. That's not the same kind of work that you and I are doing here right now, at all.
No,
So I did
but
this because I want what?
I say he's a big fan of these shitholes.
Yeah, yeah,
He like go send him there, send him there.
yeah, exactly. And I've seen people on the show that I can tell have layers of trauma. And then their parents are up there with them and they're not getting the dates exactly right and stuff. That's a symptom of trauma. Like people need to learn what a trauma response is in a child and like why they're doing certain kinds of things. And, I'm glad that the school that I went to has worked on that. They have come around when it comes to being, mandated reporters and seeing signs of things. Parents are not infallible, but even if they were abusing their child psychologically or something like that, maybe they need some kind of help. There's organizations like Head Start for younger children. Maybe we could beef that up more so we can prevent the trauma from happening so that children don't even have to go to these places anyway, and yeah, so I'm all for it. I mean, I'm willing to do the work that it takes in going forward. I'm not very good at writing like articles or, I mean, I have some cognitive stuff going on now, but I can definitely give weight and nuance to what happened to all of us, and my own story is part of that. And hopefully some of the things I've said will reach someone in a way that makes them feel not alone.
Yeah, because they're not. We're everywhere. We are literally everywhere.
There's so many of us.
I've got
Yes.
I've got a person that I'm supposed to interview, and he lives in Singapore.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean we're everywhere.
Yeah.
Um, would you say that we're in agreement if I make this statement to say, parents, do your research, 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 research? Are we in
Yeah.
agreement on that?
Yes. And I think parents should also look at not all the time, but I mean, because you don't want to shame yourself either, but maybe
No.
look at what the dynamic is in your family, and it doesn't mean you're a bad person. Just uh, work on yourself. I knew a mother who was having problems with her daughter, and they went to dialectical behavioral therapy classes together. And I thought that that was really courageous of that mother. That's a really good example of being proactive about your kid.
Yeah.
You don't just blame it on
Yeah.
the kid, you know? But it doesn't mean you're also having to blame it on anyone or yourself. Just work on knowing how to inform yourself, do the research like you said, and you know, yeah. I mean, I know that some kids really need help, and there's sometimes things within the brain that are going to come have like violent outcomes and things, and I can't speak on that too much, but you know, and I'm sorry to go back to this, but you know, I didn't really break laws to get to where I was. uh I don't think a lot of kids did. Exactly.
I was guilty of being a teenager, Bink. That's all.
Yeah, yeah, and
That's all I was guilty.
yeah, and I think even kids that do criminal things like deviant behavior is a normal part of adolescence. It's just that how do you work in the you know, it's just we have to advance in the way that we think about people, and we need to acknowledge people's personhood. That includes the parents, sure. You know, I don't know about the schools though. I feel like it's a dirty job. I feel like there's something really underhanded about all of it because it's for profit. Yeah, I want to see him called out. I want to see change, and I want to be participate in that change. So,
All right. Before I go ahead and end our little talk this afternoon, is there anything that you want to say that's just dying to come out of you?
um, I now know that I'm not a bad person,
That's right. You're not.
and I'm really proud of
I
myself
appreciate.
for even getting that far. You know, and I also want to just say thank you
Oh, you're welcome.
for what you're
But I
doing.
want you to know. I want you to know what you just said is the absolute truth. You are not a bad person. I don't believe you ever were a bad person. Did you go through some bad times? Well, yeah. Okay.
Like, heck yes.
But,
Do I do bad
but
things? Yeah, yeah,
well, okay, that too. But the
yeah.
bottom line is you're a good person. You were. In fact, you're probably not the person you tell yourself that you are.
I'm
And
still struggling with shame. Yeah.
I just want to thank you, for spending time with me and sharing your story. And I'm sure it will touch many, many lives. I'm
I hope
pretty
so.
sure of that.
Oh, thanks, Dave.
You're welcome. I'll talk to you in a
For all the
minute.
work you're doing. All right, you take care.
Uh-huh.